Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife Podcast and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started. And the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. I'm very excited today to introduce you to Clare Fuller. And Clare is a registered nurse with 30 years experience in end-of-life care, for which she is a Care Quality Commission Specialist Advisor. She campaigns for proactive advanced care planning and is the host of the Conversations About Advanced Care Planning podcast. Welcome, Clare.
Thank you, Rachel. It is wonderful to talk with you this morning. I feel you're almost a friend, I think. I've heard your podcast so often and I'm absolutely honoured to be a guest on it today.
And we've had already a quite emotional conversation offline because we're both dealing with some shit at the moment and we're going to talk possibly around that, maybe into it. We're not quite sure, but it is... I'm very grateful to you for sharing your knowledge and experience about this. And listeners, this isn't going to be easy, but listen, it's something we all need to deal with, and especially in midlife. And it's only going to need to be dealt with more and more as we get older, because eventually we're going to need to deal with it ourselves. We're going to have advanced care planning for us. So you are actually, I think, the perfect Magnificent Midlife podcast guest, because you're talking about things that really matter to us in midlife. But you've also reinvented yourself because you had a new business at 50, didn't you? So what inspired you to set up your business?
That's a great question, Rachel, and there are multiple answers to that. So it started, as you alluded to, with 30 years of palliative and end-of-life care nursing and drawing on what I'd heard and learned during that time. One thing that really resonated was time and time again, people not adequately planning ahead, and conversations I've had with families, I can still picture them and see them in my head. We were going to start our advanced care planning. We were going to do our lasting power of attorney, but we didn't, and now it's too late. Or I know what my husband wanted, and we had the forms ready, and we were going to do it, but we didn't, and now it's too late. So hearing those too late stories again and again made me want to do something about it, hearing the real impact on families about not advanced care planning. My passion is also about seeing lasting power of attorney as the whole process of advanced care planning. It's just one little part of it. So feeling that I could open conversations nationally amongst the public and amongst professionals slightly more as well. Another strand to this was finding that as I became active on Twitter, and Rachel, I was a very, very reluctant Twitter user. I was dragged into it. I don't know about you, but I was dragged kicking and screaming to Twitter. But I found it to be the most incredible network, professional network, public network of sharing and learning from. And time again, I had questions from Twitter, as well as from families and as well as from friends, about saying, my mum is dying. She really wants to be at home, but we don't know how to do it. And this came at one point. I think I was having monthly calls from family or from friends, and I thought there's a real need to this. There are questions that people need answers to that aren't being addressed. Another reason, another strand to the business, if you like, was finding myself as a relative looking after a family member who was really sick as part of the first lockdown, Rachel. This happened very suddenly, and we were thrust overnight, as so many families are, from being a normal, whatever a normal family is, into a person who was sick enough to die. And we had to have those conversations very quickly about what he would want. He chose to stay at home, and I was in, I would argue, the incredibly privileged position of being a nurse, palliative care nurse, end-of-life care nurse, and local, and able to step into looking after him. And what I found was, it was damn hard, Rachel. Despite the wealth of knowledge I had and the background knowledge, it was really, really hard. I had to fight for services to join up. I had to fight for the right medications. I had to fight for the right plan. I had to fight for him to be seen in the few days before he was died. And things just didn't join together. So again, I thought, crikey, if I struggled to do this, how hard would it be for people who didn't have this privilege? I also wrote about it as well and said we talk about barriers to end-of-life care, and not having knowledge to what you need is a barrier, just as much as money is a barrier, ethnicity is a barrier. All of these things are barriers. I started the business really looking at advanced care planning from a lasting power of attorney perspective, and you can see how it grew and grew and grew and grew. So now it includes end-of-life care service improvement for teams who want to do better delivering end-of-life care, and end-of-life care education. You alluded to the podcast, Rachel, as well at the beginning, and I'd just like to say how that developed as well, because that's a really quite a powerful story. So through Twitter, that I've mentioned already, I linked up with the most incredible lady called Clare Fisher. Now, Clare Fisher was diagnosed, I don't know if you heard of Clare, with stage 4 bowel cancer, quite out of the blue. And Clare was a campaigner for public policy and well-being. And she was an absolutely incredible person. And towards the very late part of her life, she found herself admitted to hospital. She didn't really want to be. She wanted to spend her last Christmas at home with her family. And she tweeted that she couldn't get the doctors to understand she didn't want to go to ITU. She wanted to go home. There are more important things than dying, and sometimes it's about how you die. So I contacted Clare and said, look, Clare, I feel a podcast coming on. If you're struggling, what's it going to be like for everybody else? So, Rachel, I'm so proud to tell you the first podcast I did as a podcaster was with Clare 3 weeks before she died. And that was the start of the series. So, sorry, that's a very, very long answer to how the business grew and started.
But what a profound answer. Oh, my goodness. And you know, and some listeners may know that while I am not battling with end of life, I am battling with radically changed life, because 2 months ago from when we're recording this now, my mum broke her hip, and life has changed radically. Yeah. And I, as you know, I'm also doing this master's in gerontology as well. So I'm learning so much. Yeah. It's not even just about end of life. It's about the period building up. It's the years beforehand when we do get to frailty, I suppose. I think that's the word, isn't it? When older people become frail, and that can be a different age for anybody. And my mum was traveling across the country by herself at 88, and then she broke her hip. And I keep saying it's kind of the one thing that you hope a parent won't do is break the hip. And I know too much about the implications of breaking a hip. And now I know even more about what happens when you break a hip and all the different things. And we were talking before I hit record, weren't we, that we don't talk about these things. And then we all struggle. And it's super difficult to talk about it. It's super personal. We Brits are very private, you know, and I may get into trouble even for saying what I'm saying now, but I think it's important that we have these conversations, that we talk about it. I mean, I shared with you that setting up the LPA in my family was not an easy process, but I'm glad that we have something. We have something there, because there are so many aspects to my mum's care now, and looking after her and trying to get her. She'll never go back to where she was, but I want to get her to a good stage of independent living where she can, you know, do that. But she needs help. And maybe that's just short-term help. Yeah. So we're going to talk about how to set up the LPA, the lasting power of attorney, shortly. But having that in place has enabled us to put things in place quickly when she needs it now. Yeah. And maybe she won't need it later. I don't know. But at least we had it here now. And that's why that's been helpful. But So why you've talked a little bit already about why you're so passionate about advanced care planning, but it's basically because we leave it too late, don't we? And yet, how can we start that process? And I know you've talked about the lasting power of attorney being the sort of key linchpin to that, but then it broadens out. So let's start with the LPA. Why is it so important, and why does it matter, and what do we need to do?
Lots of questions in there.
Sorry.
No. You've sort of touched on some of the answers, I guess, Rachel, and that's that. If I start by saying what a lasting power of attorney is, to put it in context, would that be a...
Yes, please.
So a lasting power of attorney is a legal document that lets you appoint somebody that you trust to make decisions for you for a time in the future when you might not be able to make those decisions for yourself. And with that 20-week wait period that it is to set it up, by the time you've lost capacity, in essence, you can't then make a lasting power of attorney. So it's something that we all need to do ahead. I live not too far from the Dartford crossing, the Dartford Bridge. So my default saying is, well, if I ever drive over the bridge and have an accident, that's not the time for me to start making a lasting power of attorney. We need to think about it for ourselves and not just associate it with older age. This is something that matters to every single one of us, Rachel, because none of us know what's around the corner. The roads are horrendously icy as we're recording this. Any one of us could need somebody to step in and speak for us at any moment.
And we make assumptions about who can do that as well, don't we? And
goodness,
it's not always as clear cut as we think it is it?
No. One of the assumptions is that your next of kin can speak for you. I think Kate Garraway spoke very publicly about this when her husband Derek developed COVID. I think it was in first lockdown. And the utter shock that your next of kin cannot speak for you unless you have a lasting power of attorney. So that is a very, very common assumption. And people make that. People think that you can make a lasting power of attorney when you need it. I think a Which poll said around about 77% of people thought, oh, I'll just make one when I need it. I'm fit and healthy. I don't need it. So they're the sort of assumptions that we're battling, that we need to fight and raise public awareness better.
And going back to the example of my mum, there are many things that can cause confusion in older people. And that confusion isn't necessarily permanent, and there can be the assumption that it is, but just being in hospital can cause confusion. Trauma can cause confusion. Diet, urine infections, all sorts of things can cause confusion. And then you really need help. You need to be able to step forward and make decisions and speak for your loved one, because there may be memory issues. You may be on a very short loop. And again, that's not saying that they're incapacitated. That's saying that they have an issue with short-term memory loss, but then they need the help. Yeah. So being able to step forward at any stage is so important. And that could happen, yes, as you say, it could happen at any age. If you suffer enough trauma, you're going to have confusion with it.
And you touch on something that's really important and often not thought of. So people often think of capacity as a yes or a no. You've either got it or you haven't got it. And I think you've raised something so important that's not so well understood, is that capacity can fluctuate. Mm-hmm. You can have capacity to choose what you eat for breakfast in the morning, what clothes you wear. You should be asked and involved in these decisions, but have you got capacity to decide whether you ought to sell your house? Have you got capacity to decide what you ought to be investing in? And those sort of things. And as you said, capacity can fluctuate. So you use the examples of confusion with infection and delirium with infection. So especially elderly, frail people will succumb to that so easily. But then that can subside. So it's important when we're talking about capacity that we're giving people every chance to... People have the right... People are assumed and presumed to have capacity unless it's proven otherwise. We have to give people every opportunity to show they have capacity by the way we communicate with them.
So an LPA can be structured in different ways. So how do we go about setting it up, and what are the things to look out for?
So to wind back, an LPA, we can have a lasting power of attorney for health and welfare, and you can have a lasting power of attorney for property and finance. Interestingly, most people do a property and finance one, where I would always think your health and welfare is more important, but hey ho, that's what the stats show us. You have to think of different things when you're setting them up. So predominantly they're the same. They enable somebody to speak for you if you lose capacity. So if we take the health and welfare one first, there's a really important decision that you have to make when you're setting it up. And just to really express that it's the donor, the person that sets up the lasting power of attorney, that states what they wish, not the attorneys, if that makes sense. So it is the donor that sets it up with capacity. So the person will decide whether to give the attorneys, so the people making decisions for them, the right to make life-sustaining treatment decisions or not. That's called option A. Option B is you don't have the right to make life-sustaining treatment decisions. The vast majority of my clients, in fact, I haven't had any client that's gone for option B, because that would really limit your lasting power of attorney. So that's one consideration you have to make with the health and welfare. Another really important one for families is how the attorneys will act if you have more than one attorney. So you have a choice of acting jointly, which means you all have to almost sit around the table and make the decisions all at the same time, jointly and severally, jointly for some decisions and severally for others. So there are big decisions to make about how your attorneys will act, and every family will be very, very different. The lasting power of attorney for health and welfare will only take place if you were to lose capacity. So all the while you've got capacity, Rachel, that sort of sits in a back drawer waiting to be pulled out and used at the drop of a hat. Moving on to the lasting power of attorney for property and finance, very, very similar. You would nominate people to speak for you. Your attorneys can act jointly and severally, jointly for some decisions and severally for others. But a really big difference with this one is that a lasting power of attorney for property and finance can take effect as soon as it's registered with the consent of the donor. And that's a mighty big decision for somebody to make. So in some families that really sits comfortably, and a parent might say, well, maybe lockdown's a great example, isn't it? I've got the mental ability to do my banking, but I can't get out there and do it. Therefore, although I could do it, my son or daughter would be starting to do it for me now with my consent. Or it can take place only if you lose capacity. So there are some of the key decisions that you'll make. There are more. I can talk about wishes and preferences. Would that be useful as well?
Just before you do that, I wanted to share that's what we have for my mum. So on the finance side, I now have a card on her account, and it has my name, and then it has POA on it. And
Brilliant.
I can now officially spend her money. I used to do it unofficially, but now I can officially do it. And that is very helpful, because
Brilliant.
now I can sort out any bills that she needs.
Yes.
Me and my brother can get cash out for her.
Yeah.
That is very good to have that. All I have to say, Barclays, you need to make it easier for me to use, because I can't. Honestly, I've been waiting months. I've got to have a flipping card reader to be able to transfer money from her account to my account, because I've spent a lot of money on her behalf, and she wants to reimburse me. I don't want a check, because I don't want to have to walk into town to pay the check in. I just want to do a transfer, and I can't. So Barclays, if anybody at Barclays is listening to this, please, can you make it a bit easier for me to be a power of attorney on my mother's account?
You're laughing, but you raise such an important part, because having power of attorney is only step one. So you can't automatically take over that role, and no.
Oh my goodness. We had to go into the bank, I had to show my passport, my birth certificate, I don't know, my shoe size, everything, all had to be, and it had to be on their calendar schedule as well. It's like, and it had to be at the local branch, or it could have been at another branch, but then I'd have had to take more stuff in with me.
There, I would love to interview you one day about how difficult it was. And every bank, every insurance policy, everything will have a different way of doing it, and that is so frustrating. There is a digital access code which is gaining more knowledge now. So theoretically, well, it sounds like Barclays didn't do it in that time. Theoretically, it should be easy for you, and you should have a digital access code you give to the bank. They can see what type of power of attorney it is, whether there are any restrictions on it, blah, 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 blah. It should be easy, but it isn't.
I've got that code.
Oh, and
I've
even
got
with that, it was
yeah,
tricky.
I've got the code, but then I can't make a transfer without this card reader
Lordy
thing.
me.
I know. I mean, I've got codes coming out my ears. Honestly, I've had to write them down because I can't remember them. You know, there's a code for this and code for that and code for the other. Telephone
And this is
banking,
easy.
online. I know, and I'm tech savvy as well.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
just imagine somebody who's not tech savvy struggling with it.
Yeah. Or
Oh
if
my
you couldn't
goodness me.
access and help your mum, if you had that barrier without the LPA in place.
Yeah.
Shocking. So you asked about the things to consider when you're setting up a form, and I've done some of the key highlights, but the wishes and preferences is another part that you can add on the form as well. So do you have any specific wishes or preferences? And you can write that when you lay out and set up your lasting power of attorney. In reality, most people tend to leave that blank. You have to be very careful that you state things that are within the law. They have to be legal. They have to not restrict the lasting power of attorney at all. I think what's more important, and we may touch upon this later in our discussion, is that your attorneys know what matters most to you. So we can't plan what's going to happen. I can't plan when I drive down the road, but I know my family know what matters most to me, and they will be able to make the right decision in the right circumstance because of the conversations that we've had over years and years and years. So I don't need to write down that minute detail in an LPA. I've just given them my voice.
But it's so important, isn't it? And I think there's a brilliant book. I think you did you when I shared about it. I think you Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. You got it on your shelf here. So that was recommended as part of my gerontology course, and I read it, and
yes,
it's brilliant. It's brilliant, and I love all of it. But the whole premise is that we have removed ourselves so much from the process of aging and end of life, but the whole of aging, the whole of, and certainly from when frailty kicks in up until the end of life, it's become so sanitized, it's become so medicalized, and it doesn't have to be like that. And if we look to other cultures, we can, and also to history, grandma used to die in the front room. I said this on the grief podcast, and we were all part of it. And I talked on that podcast as well that I wasn't allowed to go to funerals as a child of my grandparents to protect me, but it didn't protect me. It just kept me away from death. And we talked as well, didn't we, before we hit record, that these things that we're grappling with, how old do we have to be grown up enough to deal with this shit? Because sometimes it really is shit, and we've got to deal with it, and we've got to talk about it. But this book, Being Mortal, it just talks about all the different examples of people needing care, end of life, and how it can be done differently. And what I am learning, and I knew it intrinsically, but I'm learning it through data, that people don't want to die in a hospital. As you said earlier, they don't want to go to the ICU. They don't want to be in a care home. They want to die at home. They want to live at home, and they want to die at home. And increasingly, we can make that work. It's not easy, but just because it's not easy doesn't mean it's not possible. And the more we have these conversations about what we want, how we want our life to go, how we want the end of our life to be, the better it is for everybody. For the people left behind, for your family, for yourself, so that you can have this an empowered death. I mean, it's a bit of a bonkers word to use, but it's taking control. It's not giving over control. And by setting up the LPA, you're not giving over control. You're actually helping you maintain control and maintain independence as long as you possibly can. This is the battle I have with my mum, because she has people coming in to look after her during the day, and she hates it. She hates it with a vengeance. And she keeps saying, oh, I'll only need them for another 2 weeks. Oh, I'll only need them for another month. And I go, yes, of course, yes. And I take another deep breath.
Yeah.
But she hates it. But what I keep trying to say to her is, look, these things are enabling you to
Absolutely.
maintain your independence. It's not the independence you once had, but it's a lot better than you could have. So suck it up, Mum. and just,
Absolutely.
to a certain extent, go with the flow,
Yeah.
because there are certain things that she can't currently do. And, it doesn't mean it's permanent, as I said. It could be, that she gets back to a stage where she doesn't need that. We don't know yet. But at the moment, these things, these people, these processes, they're helping her stay in her home.
And that's what all these discussions are about. It's about planning ahead, talking ahead, thinking what matters most. And if it's important to your mum to stay at home, that's not going to happen with magic dust and wishful thinking. That's going to happen with planning ahead and thinking ahead. And I think what frustrates me is we have this very binary attitude that we're either living or we're dying. We're either having palliative and end-of-life care, or we're not having palliative and end-of-life care. Where in reality, we're very much, all of us, walking two roads. We're walking two paths. There's so many expressions, hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. And you'll know with your gerontology that frailty has a trajectory that we can plan for. We know the stages. People are living longer, which you mentioned before, with chronic illness. And for all of the chronic illnesses, we know the patterns. We know with chronic heart failure, the stages that people will go through, the chapters of that life. And we can plan for those different stages. We can plan for those different chapters and do things better. And it doesn't mean giving up or like you said, it's not giving up or stopping care or thinking that we're failing in some ways. All of us are mortal, being mortal. All of us, not if we die, but when we die, isn't it? And we can plan ahead and support this. And with the society we're living in, the increasing ageing population, it's something that is more and more and more important.
Something else I'm learning. Oh, I'm learning so much on my course, honestly. I'm going to start a whole new podcast, I think. But that, for example, in Indian culture, there is no shame in dependence when you get older. In fact, if you're able to be dependent on your family, that's almost like a marker of successful parenting. And yet we see it as something completely different here. And that's the fight I'm having with my mum. I'm sort of saying, it's okay. Let me help you as much as I can. But then let's get somebody else to help as well. But there's no shame in that. And yet in our culture, there is so much shame, isn't there? And the shame in getting older, but the shame in needing help. Whereas we all need help.
You mentioned something in the beginning, and we're currently going through a difficult family situation at the moment. And I'm giving help, and I'm giving help to somebody who's helped me for 54 years of my life. And it's the biggest privilege I can do now to be returning that help. It's wonderful. It's a gift, and it's something that I can do now, and is an honour to do. So I love that culture thing that you've brought in as well. It's an honour to be able to do this.
I feel that too. And I think, it was you yesterday on Twitter, wasn't it? It was. You said, care for people as you hope to be cared for yourself.
Ah, that is.
And I thought that was so beautiful. But, it's like, you need to think about, and I do believe in karma. I only have one son and he lives on the other side of the world. So it's all right. You don't need to panic now. Don't need to panic now, son, if you ever get to listen to this. But, I made a decision that this is what I want to do. Yeah. So immediately after hospital, I went for 2 weeks and I lived with my mom and I was there and I'm going up more because she doesn't live where I live. But it's a decision I've made. It's what I want to do. And it's as much for me as it is for her.
The impact on us all is phenomenal. And caring for others as you wish to be cared for has taken even a step further. So that used to be called the golden rule, and we've now, with the incredible Professor Harvey Chuchnikov, moved to the platinum rule, Rachel. We've sort of elevated that and said even better than that is care for others as they wish to be cared for themselves. So how can any one of us judge the quality of life for any other person? For some people, just being able to read. For some people, being incontinent would be the most horrendous, degrading thing they can think of others. For some people, if that can be managed well and they're able to do X, Y, or Z, they've got quality of life. So it's about not judging quality of life. We can't judge for anybody else. We can only listen to what matters to them.
Yeah, that came across very much in the Being Mortal book, didn't it? In terms
absolutely.
of what you need to ask. What, that was the question that he asked his patients, wasn't it? What?
Yeah.
I can't remember it exactly, but something like, what would be a good enough life for you?
What does a good day look like?
What does a good day look like? There you go. And maybe it's just, if I can sit up in bed and watch some particular program on television, that's a good day.
And how do we get that good day? So if somebody's in hospital being pumped full of IV antibiotics they don't want, and a good day for them is looking out their window at home, they're the things we need to be thinking about.
That's the thing. It's my mum's garden. That's it. She wants to be able to see her garden. And that's fundamentally, if she can see her garden, I think. She hasn't actually said that, and I probably need to have that conversation and actually ask her what is a good day.
Yeah.
But that is fundamental. I know, as long as she can see her garden, she's reasonably happy. Yeah.
Another way of looking at that is another good day thought or a conversation starter is joy lists as well. What brings you joy? That's a lovely way of thinking about, if I choose that treatment option, will that enable me still to do the things that bring me joy? That sort of demedicalizes things.
I use that with my coaching clients, but I hadn't thought to apply it just as much, because we can all find joy at any age of life. The scope of it may shrink, the life may shrink, but there will still be elements of joy. I love that. Thank you.
And hope. You've set me off on a different tangent now. You're going to have to drag me in, but hope changes as well. So hope throughout our lives change. And hope throughout disease processes can change. Hope for cure can change to a hope to be comfortable, or a hope to be with family, or a hope to achieve something. So it's not about giving up hope. It's about the changing nature of hope and aligning plans to the changing hope, never stopping hope or taking that away from anybody.
That's beautiful too.
I could go off on all tangents.
I knew.